Chapter 5. The Rehearsal. Inside the community hall, the air was warm with movement and murmurs. A pale parquet floor bore the shuffle marks of countless gatherings, while overhead fluorescent lights cast a clinical glow across instruments, coats, and the occasional stray music folder. The space wasn't beautiful, but it had a heartbeat, one that grew louder every Tuesday evening when George's orchestra began to gather. There were 25 of them, give or take. Some had played in orchestras for years, others were still learning to watch the baton and the music at the same time. It wasn't about flawless technique. It was about being part of something that sounded better together than it ever could alone. George stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back like a commander awaiting his troops. His stand, slightly off-kilter, mirrored the imperfect charm of the evening to come. One by one, his players entered, each a note arriving on cue, each greeting returned with a glance that marked the rhythm of familiarity. Near the back of the hall, impossible to miss, stood Grimshaw. He had relocated to the area after a divorce, looking for ways to fill his evenings, and had somehow convinced George that the double bass was just a bigger guitar and couldn't be that hard. At least, not for him. He had found his way into George's post-rehearsal pub circle with the same ease. By day, he was an office manager for a logistics firm, a constant source of bafflement to George, given that the man lived his life on the edge of disaster. He didn't so much organize his workload as surf on top of it. He approached life with the same enthusiasm he brought to music, bold, unpredictable, and always a little offbeat. His booming laugh could fill a room, and he had a habit of turning any gathering into a performance, whether anyone had asked for one or not. Stationed just behind him at the timpani was Bob, George's longtime neighbour, his sticks already resting neatly in his hands. He had helped George form the orchestra. As a retired accountant, he treated a musical score exactly like a balance sheet, with patience, precision, and a deep satisfaction in making things add up. He rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying, and when he did, it was usually dryly amusing. Just in front of them sat Mackenzie, George's oldest friend. Everything about him, his crisp shirts, the positioning of his sheet music, his intolerance for sloppy playing, spoke of his RAF days, where he and George had first met and bonded over music. His standards were exacting, but they came from a place of deep respect for the craft. Since losing his wife last year, Mackenzie's focus had sharpened to a razor's edge, a kind of determination that made George wonder if the structure and routine of the orchestra was what was holding him together. He had taken on more work, organizing scores and helping with admin tasks, as if keeping busy left less room for everything else. During rehearsals, his concentration bordered on clinical, each bar of music a small battle he refused to lose. He never spoke about his loss. He never indulged in sentimentality. And although he still came to the pub afterwards, he laughed a little less freely, as if part of him was always elsewhere. Bob leaned sideways from behind his drums. "Place your bets. How long before someone forgets where they are?" Grimshaw chuckled. Wouldn't be a Tuesday without a little musical amnesia. "Order is within reach," Mackenzie muttered, just loud enough to register. "If people treated the notes as instructions, not suggestions." Grimshaw smirked. "You should get that tattooed across your knuckles, Mackenzie. Give the violinist something to focus on." Bob choked back a laugh as Mackenzie's eyes narrowed towards him. George tapped his baton against the stand. "Good evening. Places everyone. I trust you've all warmed up and, of course, practiced this week." A few smiles travelled around the room. "Let's start with a full run-through. Tonight, let's aim for marginally fewer errors than last week." Grimshaw leaned toward Bob, delivering a stage whisper that carried clearly to the podium. "Setting the bar nice and low, aren't we?" After a few false starts, the orchestra eased into the second movement of Haydn's Symphony No. 94, The Surprise. George had chosen it for its structured elegance and playful spirit. The melody wove through the room, the strings light and plucking, the woodwinds soft and assured. He felt something stir in his chest, not pride exactly, but presence, a reminder that this mattered. George's baton moved with intent, shaping the quiet before the storm. He leaned in, teasing out the silence. Then, a loud, reverberating boom split the hall. All eyes turned to Bob, frozen behind his timpani, staring wide-eyed at the copper kettle drum, still quivering from the force of his overzealous strike. George lowered his baton. Bob, that is indeed the surprise. But I believe Haydn intended it to be a musical punctuation mark, not a declaration of war. Bob grinned sheepishly. Sorry, everyone, I got a bit carried away. Thought we needed a wake-up call. George smiled, shaking his head. He raised his baton to regain the hall's attention. Focus, please. Let's take it from the top. And this time, try to resist the urge to summon thunder mid-symphony. Bob gave a mock bow, tapping the drum lightly in apology. I'll keep it gently melodic from now on. By the end of rehearsal, George felt a twinge of pride. They weren't perfect, far from it, but they were improving. And within the occasional missed cue or flat note, there was something real, something honest. Well done, my friends, George said, smiling. Real progress tonight. Violins, you kept the variations tight. Brass, much better control on the volume. And woodwinds, that was your cleanest run yet. A smattering of contented applause followed. George clapped his hands one last time. For those coming to the pub, I'll see you there. For those heading home, safe journey until next week. As the musicians packed up and said their goodbyes, Grimshaw plucked a few playful notes on his double bass. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the sound of a man who's earned a pint. First round's on you, Bob. Bob smirked. Fine, but leave the bass in the car. The bar staff are still recovering from your jazz solo last week. Chapter 6. The Revolution. The post-rehearsal pub brimmed with life. The scent of aged wood and well-poured ale lingered in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of slow-cooked stew from the kitchen. The scuffed floors, the time-worn bar, the familiar creak of the door as another regular arrived. It was a place that hadn't changed in decades. And for George, that was its greatest appeal. It absorbed the orchestra almost by instinct. Musicians slotted into old haunts and favourite corners, settling into the steady, comfortable rhythm of their weekly ritual. At their usual corner table, George, Mackenzie, Grimshaw and Bob had settled in. Coats draped over chairs, drinks in hand, each one a reflection of their personalities. A gaudy pink and orange cocktail for Grimshaw, brash, sweet and wildly out of place in a traditional pub. A neat glass of whiskey for Mackenzie, the amber liquid catching the glow of the pub lights. And 2 pints of ale, one for Bob and one for George. Grimshaw raised his glass first, grinning. To George, who somehow manages to make us sound like we actually know what we're doing every week. The others followed, lifting their drinks with quiet smiles. Cheers, George said simply, the word carrying more warmth than ceremony. His gaze drifted to Grimshaw's drink, and his brow creased slightly as he eyed the glass, half expecting it to start fizzing of its own accord. Tropical firestorm, Grimshaw announced. Passion fruit, blue curacao, and a prayer. He took a triumphant sip. Told the barman I needed something bold. If I'm back on the dating scene, I can't be drinking beige. Shouldn't that be served in a lava lamp? George asked, still eyeing the drink with exaggerated suspicion. Style, George. Grimshaw lifted the glass with a grin. Some of us like a bit of flair. A small shake of the head was George's only response. Whatever that is, it belongs in a chemistry lab, not a pub. Don't knock it till you've tried it, Grimshaw countered, leaning back with a look of supreme satisfaction. George smiled, settling into his chair. I'd rather survive the evening with my dignity intact. So, Bob said, cutting in and leaning forward. First day back. How'd it go? George set his glass down, the impact a little harder than intended. He hesitated. Let's just say, teaching is starting to feel like a violin I can't tune. It's not like you to sound defeated, Mackenzie said, giving him a steady look. A wry half-smile tugged at George's lips. The heads announced that music will be merged with drama. Apparently we are now to be known as creative synergy. Creative synergy? Bob exhaled sharply. It sounds like a yogurt brand. A frown creased Grimshaw's face while Mackenzie simply shook his head. What's next? Food tech and physics mashed into culinary forces? George let out a dry chuckle. Give it time. I know his sort, Grimshaw smirked. Bet he's the first to clap when the plane lands. And thinks saying, let's circle back on that makes him a visionary, Bob added, deadpan. Mackenzie swirled his whiskey, watching the amber light catch the glass. Probably calls meetings huddles. And yet, George said, shaking his head, people like him are in charge of shaping young minds. Comforting thought, isn't it? Grimshaw grinned. Well, look at it this way, Bob said, leaning over his ale. On a Tuesday night, you're the one calling the tune, not him, and I know who's getting the better results. George didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the room. The orchestra members were still laughing and catching up, their enthusiasm stretching beyond the music itself. They cared. They showed up. They put in the effort. It dawned on him. This was exactly what was missing at school and why he went into teaching. Not for synergy or strategy, but for the freedom to teach and learn in a safe environment without a target grade attached to every note. An idea began to take shape, wild, unlikely, but gaining momentum even as he spoke. What if we built something of our own? Mackenzie lowered his glass, eyeing him warily. Define something. A music school, George said, almost surprised by the words himself. He paused, considering. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. A Saturday club. Introduce them to instruments properly. Teach it the way it should be taught, to people who actually want to learn. Imagine what we could achieve with our combined expertise. Mackenzie let out a short breath. So, you're planning a revolution, or just a very expensive headache? Bob rubbed the back of his neck, his accountant's instincts kicking in. Where did that come from? That's a massive undertaking, George. He started counting off on his fingers. We'd need a venue, instruments, public liability insurance, safeguarding policies, DBS checks for all of us. And that's before we even look at the accounts. George watched him, waiting. But, in theory, Bob gave a slow, calculating nod. It's possible, if we structure it right. Health and safety would have to be watertight too, Mackenzie added. A proper plan for who's teaching what, and naturally, someone to keep Grimshaw away from the petty cash. I'll have you all know I'm very responsible with money. Grimshaw pressed a hand to his chest, the picture of wounded innocence. Just don't ask Janet about the office tea subs. Long story, innocent mistake. The table laughed, the tension easing. George looked around at them. It's a big ask, but if we took it step by step, if we just explored the idea, imagine what we could actually achieve. What do you think? We'd need a proper framework, George, Bob suggested. Something we can test, maybe just for a term to start. And we'll need a name, Grimshaw said, perking up. Something punchy. Grimshaw's Academy of Musical Excellence, or GAME for short. Mackenzie didn't even blink. That's the first and last time your name will be anywhere near a prospectus. Well, there goes my legacy. Grimshaw let out a long, tragic sigh and slumped back in his chair. George looked at each of them. I don't expect a decision right now, but how about we meet tomorrow night, 7 at mine. Sleep on it, bring your ideas. He turned to Grimshaw, levelling a stern finger at him. And that means proper suggestions. not designs for branded mugs. Spoil sport, Grimshaw muttered, though he raised his glass in a silent toast of agreement. The banter faded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. As they finished their drinks, the idea hung in the air between them, real, fragile, and theirs. The night air hit them as they stepped out of the pub, cool, sharp, with a hint of rain in the distance. Laughter trailed behind them from inside, but the conversation between George and the others had thinned into a quieter rhythm. As they walked into the car park, they were greeted by the sight of a group of lads crowding around Mackenzie's Volvo. "They look like trouble to me," Bob murmured. Grimshaw sniffed. "Yes, looks like the Mensa rejects are out in force tonight." Mackenzie didn't break stride. He marched forward, voice sharp as gravel. "Oi, move away from the car." The lads turned around slowly. Their leader, tall and cocky in a puffer jacket, gave a lazy smirk. "Keep your wig on, Grandad. Just looking." The others laughed, one flicking a cigarette butt onto the tarmac near Mackenzie's tire. George stepped up beside Mackenzie, silent but steady, a quiet line in the sand. Bob and Grimshaw flanked them, arms folded, saying nothing but making it clear they weren't backing down. Mackenzie's voice cut through the silence. "I said move away." The group squared up to them, the air thick with cheap aftershave and bravado. Their leader looked Mackenzie up and down, unimpressed. "Are you four seriously going to try something? 4 old blokes against 5 of us? I like those odds." Mackenzie didn't blink. "You think numbers matter? I've dealt with worse than you lot before you were even a glint in your father's eye. Now move." The leader held Mackenzie's gaze, but there was a flicker of uncertainty, the smallest crack in his confidence. He hadn't expected the old man to hold his ground. George spoke up, his voice calm. "I'd listen if I were you, lads." One of the lads sneered. "Oh, his boyfriend's speaking up for him now, is he?" Bob leaned in, voice low and firm. "Enough." But the leader stood his ground, defiance tightening his jaw. "What's it to you where I stand? We ain't done nothing. Do you see any damage?" Mackenzie stepped closer, almost nose to nose, not quite touching, but utterly fearless. "Because it's my car, and because you're standing too close to it. Now move." He waited. The boy glared back, eyes darting sideways, searching for support from his mates. Mackenzie didn't move. "Lost your voice, have you?" A tense pause. Then one of the group muttered, "Come on, Callum, let's go. Let this bunch of losers get back to the care home." Callum shot Mackenzie a resentful, uncertain look, but said nothing. They slouched off, slow and sulky, trying to salvage some dignity in the retreat. As they vanished into the dark, one of them yelled, "Watch your windows, Grandad!" None of the men reacted, not outwardly anyway. Beneath the surface, adrenaline simmered. George clapped Mackenzie on the shoulder, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Well handled." "That was brilliant, Mackenzie," Grimshaw said. "You look in your element when you've got someone to put in their place." Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. Bob nodded in agreement. "You've certainly got the 'don't mess with me' look. You should use that in rehearsals, George, when Grimshaw forgets where he is in the music again." "One missed note and I'm branded for life," Grimshaw complained, throwing his hands up. "It's not just one note, though, is it?" Bob countered with a smirk. A few chuckles broke the silence, loosening the last of the tension. "All right," Mackenzie checked his watch. "I think we've handled our share of local delinquents for the evening. I'll see you all tomorrow at George's house." 7 sharp, George confirmed. A rhythmic tap on the car roof signaled Grimshaw's departure. "Looking forward to it, gentlemen." Bob opened his door, offering a final wave. "Yes, let's see what we can come up with. I'll see you tomorrow." As George pulled out of the car park for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't look quite so grey. Chapter 7. The Idea. Margaret! George's voice rang through the house before he'd even shut the door. Margaret set her book aside, eyebrows raised in amused surprise. She looked up just in time to see him stride into the living room, cheeks flushed and breathing quick with anticipation. "I'm starting my own music school," he declared. Margaret blinked, her book forgotten in her lap. "Wait, what?" She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You've just walked through the door like a man on a mission, didn't even say hello, and now you're casually announcing a redecorating of our lives. Should I be making tea or calling a doctor?" He had the good sense to look sheepish, but not enough to stop pacing. "It's not a whim, Margaret, it's real. I saw it tonight, plain as day, back at the pub. And it wasn't just me. Bob, Mackenzie, Grimshaw, they saw it too. They're all on board. We could actually make a difference." Margaret studied him, arms folded now, part skeptic, part believer. "Is this about making a difference? Or are you just scared of being left behind while Swaby rebrands the arts?" George winced. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. "It's not about pride. Not really. I don't want to look back in 10 years and realize I did nothing. If there's still a way to teach music properly, to reach the ones who actually care, then I have to try." "George," she said gently, "every time something shakes you, you throw yourself into a new project. It's how you cope. I just want you to be sure this is right for you." "I'm sure. This is about seeing what happens when you cut out the red tape. No endless meetings, no box ticking, just music taught by people who care." He met her eyes, his voice steady. "I know it won't be easy. I know we're starting from nothing. But if even one of them walks in and finds what I found in music, structure, purpose, something to belong to, then it will be worth it." She studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in the armor. Finding none, she reached out and took his hand. "You don't owe the world every last bit of yourself, George, but if you're doing this because it feels right, then I'm with you." He squeezed her hand. "It feels right." Margaret softened, the corner of her mouth lifting. "All right then, let's hear what your pub committee came up with." "Well, it would have to start small. A Saturday program, maybe. We won't let it interfere with our day jobs. And we'd have to find a space, of course." "Obviously," she smirked. "Unless you were planning to run it from our living room?" George rubbed his chin. "I was thinking on the way home. Maybe St. Jude's Church Hall. It used to be the center of everything before the new community center took over." "That's a good thought," Margaret nodded. "I don't think it's used much these days. It doesn't look in the best condition from the outside, though." "Just needs a bit of elbow grease," George said, the wheels in his mind turning rapidly. "We'd need instruments, too. There's a cupboard full of unused ones at school. I'll ask Swaby if we can borrow them." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll agree?" "He's always preaching about community links. Well, here's his chance to prove it. Besides, they're just gathering dust." He paused, catching his breath. "Grimshaw, Bob and Mackenzie are coming over tomorrow evening at 7 to plan it out properly. Hopefully, we'll come away with something real." "So," Margaret said, a flicker of admiration crossing her face, "in the span of 1 pint, you've gone from a grumble to a board of directors?" "Just ideas, Margaret. But good ideas all the same." She smiled, standing up and switching off the lamp. "We'll figure it out, George. But for now, come on, let's get to bed." The next morning, George was already at the kitchen table, a half-eaten slice of toast and a mug of tea in front of him. His eyes flicked across a notepad filled with hastily scribbled ideas, the pen still resting in his hand. Margaret entered, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself against the morning chill. She gave him a look that hovered somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "You're up early," she said. "Plotting your grand curriculum already?" George offered a sheepish smile. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Margaret studied him for a moment, the corners of her mouth twitching. You've got the look of a man who found a pot of gold under his pillow." He swallowed a mouthful of toast, brushing crumbs from his fingers. "I can't change the world, Margaret, but with this idea, maybe I can improve a small corner of it." She hid a smile behind her mug. She'd known it last night, but now it was written across him in full. He was all in. "Right then, St. Jude's," she said, settling into the chair opposite. "I'll give them a ring this morning, see if they're open to renting the hall. If so, I'll arrange a time for us to have a proper look around." George met her gaze, gratitude plain on his face. Margaret smiled back. "I know you, George Pembroke, and I haven't seen that spark in your eyes for a long time." He shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "So no chance I'll change my mind, then?" "Not a chance," she replied, sipping her tea. "Now finish your toast. You've got a revolution to plan." Chapter 8. The Dynamic Duo. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the streets as George guided his car along the familiar route to school. His mind was fixed on the meeting that evening. As he slowed at the junction near the old garage, George spotted a group of boys leaning against the wall, hoods up, one of them dragging a key along the brick in slow, careless arcs. He recognized the ringleader immediately. It was Callum, the boy from the pub car park. George didn't stop. He just watched for a moment as the boy grinned at something one of the others said, shoulders loose, eyes scanning the street like the world owed him nothing and everything at once. He eventually pulled into the school car park, took a moment to adjust his tie in the rearview mirror, then grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the entrance. Before he got there, a voice rang out behind him. "Morning, Mr. Pembroke." George turned to see Tom Amery hurrying to catch up, practically bouncing with energy. "Glad I caught you before school," Tom said, slightly out of breath. "I had a thought last night." George sighed inwardly. His initial impression of Tom hadn't changed. Young, excitable, and far too casual. The patterned shirt, the aggressively mismatched tie, the lime green trousers. Had he gotten dressed in the dark? But like it or not, they were colleagues now. If they were expected to work together, he supposed he should at least listen to Tom's ideas. "Good morning, Mr. Amery," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Well, let's hear it. I'm all ears." "Well, since we'll soon be a team, the dynamic duo, if you will," he said with a chuckle. George just stared at him. "Too soon," Tom added quickly. Clearing his throat, he pressed on. "I was thinking about ways we could bring our subjects together. You know, really make this creative synergy thing work. So, what do you think about a joint football project?" George stopped walking. He turned to face Tom, his expression unreadable. "I beg your pardon?" Tom's grin widened. "Football, music, drama, the ultimate trio." George let out a slow breath. "Ah, yes. The pinnacle of 30 years in the classroom, guiding 12-year-olds through a harmonized rendition of Oggy, Oggy, Oggy. That's certainly a creative direction." Tom's smile faltered, but he ploughed on. "Drama could stage the big match moment. Penalties, heartbreak, a last-minute winner. Or maybe a stirring monologue from the linesman's flag. Compelling stuff. I know it sounds a bit mad, but football, music, and drama are more connected than you'd think." George raised an eyebrow, keeping his voice flat. "Go on." "Football's basically theatre. It's rhythm, emotion, storytelling, chants, anthems, national pride. Think about the Champions League theme. You know what it's based on, right?" George opened his mouth to dismiss it, then paused. "Enlighten me." Tom beamed. "Handel, Zadok the Priest, a 1727 coronation anthem still shaking stadium rafters. That's music evolving. It connects generations." George stopped. He actually stopped. It was a solid point. It showed effort, real, thought-through effort. The kind that he respected, even if it came wrapped in lime green trousers. "What do you think?" Tom asked. There was something else beneath the surface, uncertainty, maybe even hope. He was new, after all. And a nod from someone like George. It meant something. The look reminded George of the old days. Students lingering after rehearsal, eyes wide, eager to show what they'd practiced. That quiet hunger for approval. Maybe he'd missed that more than he realized. I think it has merit, Tom, he said, more gently this time. Let me give it some thought, and perhaps we can sit down and structure it properly. Before Tom could respond, a third voice chimed in. Morning, gentlemen. Swaby strode over with purpose, clutching a folder, bristling with papers, and wearing his usual air of rehearsed enthusiasm. Morning, sir, Tom said brightly. Just discussing the merger and our first joint project, football. Ah, fantastic, Swaby said. A musical about the World Cup, is it? Something stirring? Pavarotti with vuvuzelas? George blinked. Swaby's grasp of nuance could be printed on a matchbox and still leave room for fire safety advice. Exactly the kind of innovation I was hoping to see driving the arts forward, Swaby declared, clapping his hands together like a game show host who'd just spun the winning wheel. I'd love for you two to get this moving. Might be worth rolling out across the trust. Tom, ever enthusiastic, nodded. Absolutely. Swaby turned to George. We'll prepare something in writing, sir. Fantastic, Swaby beamed, already halfway through mentally presenting it to the board as his idea. He turned on his heel and strode toward the school entrance, humming something vaguely triumphant. George and Tom watched him go. Then they turned to each other and shared a brief look, the specific solidarity of two people who had just survived a moment of nonsense together. George muttered, Vuvuzelas. God help us. They started to walk towards the entrance, and Tom paused. I've just thought of the literacy link, he grinned. Shakespearean match commentary. Is this a ball I see before me? You worry me, Tom. Of all the things George had expected from this merger, Shakespearean football hadn't been one of them. The usual bustle of students filled the corridor as they made their way to the staff room. George spotted Lottie Healy at her locker, head bent, focused, seemingly untouched by the noise around her. He turned slightly to Tom. Excuse me a moment, and made his way towards her. Lottie noticed him, closed her locker, and turned with a polite smile. Good morning, Mr. Pembroke. George folded his arms. Morning, Lottie. You've not come to tell me you've changed your mind about the violin, have you? Her expression turned firm. Not at all. Actually, my parents were asking if there were any books or materials I should get for practice. They want to make sure I have everything I need. George nodded, impressed. Let's have the first lesson. I'll assess where you're at, then tell you what's worth getting. No point spending money on books you don't need. Her face brightened. Really? Thank you, sir. Be on time. I will be, she promised. As Lottie walked away, George allowed himself the faintest flicker of something rarer than satisfaction, hope.